This is the beginning of the second roundtable on Industry 4.0 and in general on future labor perspectives and future labor market and skill trends. This is the title of the roundtable. When discussing future job perspectives, we tend to look beyond the fence to make some steps forward and imagine what can happen in the future. And there are all sorts of predictions. We have the sensation and the feeling that the traditional world, the one we have been accustomed to, is about to dissolve, is about to be displaced by a totally different world. A world which is certainly new and whose boundaries are very uncertain. As far as my personal opinion is concerned, the very fast change we are witnessing now and will be witnessing in the future is not going to be so revolutionary. Not as much as other changes that took place in the past decades. It's sure that technology will have a considerable impact on production modes, on the workplace, on knowledge transmission. And the combination of all these variables will produce a different scenario, a different landscape. In this different landscape, it will be of paramount importance to develop the required skills and competencies. So this will be of strategic importance for graduates and undergraduates. It will be important to develop the required skills in order to solve the problem of unmatching. And with reference to Italy, the situation is often depicted as very negative. We are experiencing a situation of unmatching, a situation that we have been grappling with for some years. It's not a novelty, it's not something new. And from this point, we can't but improve. I don't think that the advent of new production technologies and new production modes will produce a deep suffering in our country. The situation will not be worse than what we already have. But of course, we must be prepared. We have to devise instruments of knowledge, and the AlmaLaurea survey provides very valuable information and data on what happens to graduates after a certain period of time. The surveys, of course, provide a reflection on what has already happened. They produce a snapshot of the past and present, but we can also derive some suggestions for a future transformation from these data. We know that in Italy, one of the issues related to mismatching has to do with the fact that we have a downward mismatching. On the one hand, there is an over-education with respect to demand, but on the other hand, there is also the opposite phenomenon, an under-education phenomenon, as emerged also from this morning's proceedings. Unfortunately, I was not here in the morning. I didn't have the opportunity to listen to the previous papers, but also within the framework of the OECD studies that were presented previously, it appears that we are moving towards a downward alignment. Italian businesses require few skills. As a tendency, they also require few graduates, and as a consequence, the supply of graduates is very poor, and this has negative consequences in terms of Italy's growth, both quantitatively and qualitatively. Can we say that the current system, will not be able to govern change? I don't think this will be the case. What I think is that we have to be very down to earth. We must be very concrete and be aware of some structural characteristics of our country, some characteristics that guard us against the turbulence of current changes which very often are not indicative of a trend. They are just short or very short-term changes which do not lead to a new trend. First of all, we have a body of regulations that govern the labor market, which is very robust, has roots in a long-standing tradition, and with the Jobs Act reform, it has not abdicated to its classical rules that guarantee work relationships. So it has not brought about a break from the past. It's just adjusted the classical principles and paradigms to take into account the current change. On the one hand, there has been a strong bet on subordinate open-term employment, a contractual scheme which is not doomed to lose its usefulness for employers and employees. And on the other hand, there has been an opening to new forms of employment contracts. And I'm referring to autonomous contracts. And there has been a new law on freelance occupations and self-employment. And one of its purposes is to give a solution to this, new options. And on the other hand, the subordinate employment contracts have been renovated, have been changed. They are conceived as investments for employees and employers in terms of training and quality. So there has been no multiplication and duplication of employment contracts in the new reform. If this direction had been taken, then the skill content of work and labor itself would have come out impoverished. But with the agile work reform, the legislator has remained in a continuity scheme. So the traditional subordinate employment scheme has been modernized and has been freed of two paradigms. That is to say, time and place. By place, I mean the physical place of the enterprise, and time is a time that is unilaterally specified by the employer. This means that we can address changes, but we remain within the rigid and stringent scheme of the subordinate employment contract, even though we have gone beyond rigid and strict time constraints. Now we have to focus our attention on building a system, a pipeline that will continue this improvement scheme, and I'm referring to the skills. We have to accompany students from school to university to postgraduate studies and to placement on the labor market through a trainee period, working period. We have to provide the support to individuals in the various stages of their education up to the final employment. The ANPAL agency, which I represent here, the National Agency for Active Labour Policies, and this agency pursues this objective. One of its goals is to provide the support to unemployed people so that they can be placed on the labor market in the shortest possible time. But another goal is to make a contribution to a new system where the labor market and where transition from school or university to the work and labor market takes place in an orderly way, so to say, without the strong discontinuities that have been so frequent in our school and education tradition. In the past, students were generally considered individuals to be protected, to be kept focused. Students should not be distracted by experiences of contamination in the labor market and was sheltered from a direct knowledge of building organization and its dynamics. I think that we should have students meet with businesses in a regulated way, not in a do-it-yourself way. And this should become part of an overall project where the right weight is given to these experiences depending on the specific phase of education. This is a sort of progressive support. Students are supported and accompanied in developing the cross-disciplinary or soft skills. They are not the result of a specific course. They are the result of experiences that cannot be reproduced in a classroom. These are experiences that every student have to undertake themselves on their own. And these soft skills will give our students a competitive advantage, even if we start from a competitive disadvantage, because Italian young people suffer from a delay between the completion of studies and employment on the labor market, which is about 50% higher than is the case for other students of other countries. And this produces the phenomenon of dispersion. I'm referring to skill dispersion. The longer you remain inactive, the more likely it is that you lose mastery of your skills. And this will have an impact on the quality of labor and will also have an impact on the growth of our companies. Italian businesses suffer from a low level of educational attainment of their management. Managers don't have a very high level of education. This is something typical of the Italian productivity production fabric. Manufacturing companies are not very willing to hire graduates because It happens very often that the company owner does not have a degree, and these changes can't but be the result of cooperation between the various stakeholders, universities, businesses, under a national leadership in order to facilitate this type of transition. We know that in those instances where this transition was implemented and became part of a system, and I'm referring to Germany, this transition proved to be very successful. But Germany is not the only example. In Germany, we have a very smooth transition from one phase to another. And in countries such as Germany, the education level is higher. There are more graduates in those countries where young people have the opportunity to meet with businesses at a very early stage. In Italy, we have taken the opposite approach with a very widespread opinion according to which if young people meet businesses early on in their education, they tend to drop out and start working at an earlier stage. But the opposite is true, as other countries have demonstrated. The Good School Reform, this is the name of the Italian education system reform, unlike the reform of the employment contract rules, needs a very long phase to be implemented. It is not just sufficient to write and draw up the rule and publish them on the journal. It requires a long time of fine-tuning and adjustment in order to bear fruit. And I think that the ANPAL agency, which I represent, can provide an important contribution to this process. And we have set up the tutor program for the work-study coordination project. ANPAL Servizi will just provide support to businesses and education institutions, will facilitate the exchanges between businesses and schools and universities. And we want this project to be successful. On the other hand, we see that there has been a very superficial approach in schools in managing these programs. School directors and deans are too busy to organize these projects in the best possible way. Very often they rely on operators who are not sufficiently qualified, operators and players who don't have a very deep knowledge of what's available on the territory. So we don't think it possible to organize these surveys in the best possible way without knowing both the supply and demand sides. And we need sophisticated instruments. We need predictive tools of demand which are sufficiently reliable. We are developing proprietary instruments in order to anticipate and predict the labor market trends in line with the skill evolution, and we will draw on these instruments and train tutors in these skills, in matching skills, so that students will be presented with experiences, work experiences that fit with his or her talents, aspirations, and with the course of study. that is undertaken. I don't want to take away too much time and use up all of your time. The participants to this roundtable don't come exclusively from the academic world. They are representatives of the business world. And they will bring their practical experience as operators of the production systems. And I would like to hand over to Professor Massimo Bertolini of the University of Parma.
Thank you and good afternoon. The topic of this roundtable, Industry 4.0, which development pathways for jobs and skills, is quite an exciting one. I've been attending conferences on Industry 4.0 for many years already. I tend to start with the same notes. The first one is that this is a beautiful marketing operation. Industry 4.0 was established by the Germans with a lot of substance behind this concept. Our task as university professors, and I am the president of the degree course in management engineering, so our task as teachers at university is to be able to anticipate the knowledge that our business engineers and engineers in general will have to have in the future in a new world which will be different from the one of the past 20 years. The technologies will be overwhelming in the future, as was the case in the past. Industrial revolutions were all dependent on deep technological changes and innovations, like this one. We will have a pervasive use of technologies. I won't list them all, not to bore you. In the last 2 years, I've seen quite a morbid attention and focus on technology at all costs, as if without technology we would not be able to change anything in the industrial processes. So educational courses should rely on technology only, it seems, but we believe that technology will certainly be important and will play a pivotal role in the future. We believe that high technology skills will be required of mechanic, electronic, mechatronic, communication engineers. But what is technology useful for in the industrial processes? Probably it will make certain operations easier. But to make things easier, you have to design and plan well and accurately. You have to be able to design processes in the most rapid and simplest way. After this, you may use technologies to exploit what the market is offering us, both now and in the future, in a better way. So in order to work in a 4.0 environment, you will need technology-based skills, but technological knowledge must be guided on by the ability to know how the business processes will change in manufacturing and in the industry as a whole. One will have to design simple, innovative processes capable of adapting these technologies. Last September, we participated in a European call for the network on innovation for small and medium-sized enterprises. In Parma, we have, as a consequence of this, set up a digital hub whose mission is to train people by giving them knowledge and know-how in the Industry 4.0 environment based on technological know-how and the ability to redesign business processes, broadly speaking, using these technologies, deploying them to their highest potential. We have won this tender. Ours is one of the 5 innovation hubs. It's called SMILE, Smart Manufacturing Innovation for Excellence, Line Excellence. We have won this with the Union of Manufacturers in Parma. One of the representatives of this association was here this morning. Together with the Association of Manufacturers, we have started co-designing degree courses. Next year, there will be a jointly designed degree course with specific skills contents for new engineers that will have to work in the new environments. And together with the Association of Manufacturers, we have courses held by company staff so as to bring the academic world closer to the industrial world. Our digital innovation hub will aim at involving small and medium-sized enterprises. SMEs are difficult to involve in a process of technological and digital innovation. Large industrial groups instead are strong enough to represent the beacon for change. At this level, we can find good connection, good relationship between the industrial world and the academic world. We can transfer a lot to undergraduates and graduates, and also to company staff. In terms of redesigning processes, this is quite simple, and also technological skills in relation to Industry 4.0, which is a more complex task. So this is what we're doing at the moment. To conclude, we believe that the future skills will be highly technological ones, but not only. We should not fall in love with technology and use it at all costs. In many areas, technological development makes us 3 steps forward and 3 steps back. What is necessary is to understand the process, to understand the way of doing things, and be able to implement organizational governance which is as streamlined as possible. We can do this relying on new technologies, but these are quite well-established paradigms which rely on the past and which we will be implementing thanks to new technologies.
Grazie, grazie, mi sembra una...
Thank you. Thank you for this perfect summary of the main themes, the main challenges. The challenges I had within the Industry 4.0 framework. And now I would like to hand over to Riccardo Illy, and he will provide the entrepreneur's point of view. Thank you very much. I would like to start with a few preliminary remarks, because there's one aspect which is usually neglected, and it is that 2 big changes are taking place, and they are affecting the economic and human society. And these are two overlapping phenomena. In the past, we managed to address big changes, but they came one at a time. In this case, they are occurring together simultaneously. On the one hand, there is the phenomenon of globalization, not just the market globalization also in terms of the spread of knowledge thanks to the internet, and globalization in terms of having a common language. English is coming up as a common language. And then society globalization. I'm not just referring to illegal immigration flows. I'm also referring to Italian students who study abroad in London or other countries. And another phenomenon is one of digitalization. The two phenomena are mutually reinforcing. The internet is the framework, is the backbone behind digitalization, and it's also a factor, is also a technology that promotes globalization. Without the internet, the globalization process wouldn't have been as fast. These two overlapping and simultaneous phenomena put businesses and society to a great pressure, despite the opportunities they provide. And within this framework, the Industry 4.0 concept has emerged. This is just a beginning. As suggested by the term industry, what is meant by it is production, but this is just one part of an enterprise. A business enterprise is not just production. If we think of Professor Porter's scheme, before production we have the provisioning system, then incoming logistics, industrial department, and outgoing or outbound logistics, and then the post-sale service, after-sale service. But if this is the framework of Industry 4.0, the next step will be the Business 4.0. This will apply not just to raw material and services, and will also involve other suppliers and service providers in the sales and marketing areas, in the area of administration and finance. I'm referring to the banking and legal services. And on the other hand, there will be a potential involvement of consumers to provide services to them via e-commerce, and to establish a two-directional relationship with them. And what will follow this phenomenon is the so-called Society 4.0, a society in which consumers and public administration and businesses, and the public administration often comes at a later stage, even though it should be the promoter of this networking of all subjects and entities, and should govern this phenomenon. So all these various entities will be put on the same network. Every time that we will need a certificate, a public administration service, even health-related, we will be able to stay simply at home. We will open a portal, we will see the requirements, and we will be able to initiate the procedure to obtain that particular service. And all the passages that are managed, all the events which are now managed analogically, for example, going to a physician for an examination, it will be necessary to go physically to the medical practice, but for purposes of measuring blood pressure or making other examinations, you can do this at home. For example, getting the prescription or submitting it to a pharmacy, everything will be digitalized. And this will take place within the framework of a Society 4.0. And I would like to refer to the laboratory manager figures that we will need. But before moving to this topic, let me make another remark. The two phenomena I've just depicted, globalization and digitalization, led, on the one hand, to the offshoring of companies, and to the other hand, they led to an inshoring process of citizens via the migration flows. What has been the result in developed countries of these two phenomena? First of all, labor demand. Businesses moved first to China and will soon be moving to Africa, whereas on the other hand, we have a migrant flow. There will be an increase in labor supply and a decrease of labor demand. The lowest social class will see its income impacted by this imbalance between supply and demand. On the other hand, the digitalization process has partly impacted the middle class. Consider the organization of a bank some 10 years ago. We had the clerks at counter, so a profession which has disappeared. And think of other professions and occupations that were typical of the middle class, and they are progressively disappearing. And this is leading to a polarization process. On the one hand, we have a smaller and smaller class of former blue collars, a poorer class due to the lower demand. And on the other hand, we have an oversupply of individuals with a high level of educational attainment, master degree holders. And I would put in this new class of workers, technical workers, those who have attended a vocational school, and they will become the new middle class, the technicians of automation, the authors of the automation process. So there will be a high demand for graduates and technical specialists. 2.6 million young people. And I've used an acronym that starts with F, but I'm not going to mention it. So they think that it's not worthwhile studying and earning a degree because of lack of jobs. The Statistical Institute conducts monthly reports. The recent report on labor is available on the internet, and one of these reports made a split of graduates depending on their title, and the highest percentage was of those young people without a degree qualification. And graduates have reached a physiological level, 4.5%, between 4 and 5%. So the belief that once you have graduated, it will be difficult to find a job is totally wrong and is induced by misinformed journalists who continue to spread fake news. And this leads to this misconception. What skills will be in high demand in the future? And today there are some competencies and skills which are very hard to find. Engineering skills, for example. In China too, even if there is a high supply, it is difficult to find a engineer and even to find a specialist that manages IT systems and softwares. And it's also difficult to find salespeople who are fluent in languages in order to take up the export manager role. But in order to implement the 4.0 business and in the future the 4.0 society, we need system integrators more and more. Individuals with a sufficient technical and professional knowledge, highly specialized people who are highly competent in one topic only, in one subject only, but they are not enough in order to be able to integrate several systems, not just the digital, but also society, selling systems, health-related systems, legal systems. What is needed is a horizontal or transversal knowledge. People who know few things, but in sufficient number in order to be able to navigate different sectors, so that they can establish a dialogue with all the other individuals and entities that will be integrated in Society 4.0. Another important issue is that of changing trends. Two trends are taking place at the same time, digitalization and globalization. And it's not only this. There is a continuous development of new processes at company level, at business level, at association level. We will need change managers, professionals who can predict changes, can establish a proactive approach, can understand what is taking place and can take adaptive action, and are able to identify what changes are necessary and are able to persuade all members of the organization in the implementation of these changes, are able to find the right resources to manage the change, people who are able to predict what human resources a company will need in view of future changes. And I would like to conclude by mentioning the creation of new businesses. This must become necessarily an option for new graduates. New graduates tend to conceive their own future in terms of subordinate employment, in the best case in a managerial position. Just few new graduates are considering setting up a new business. And there is a huge potential to be exploited here if only students were educated to think in these terms, and new resources should be devised to support young people. So my encouragement to young people is to think of their future also in terms of an entrepreneurial activity, of becoming entrepreneurs. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for your very interesting insights, Mr. Illy. Well, we need to reflect on this. You were mentioning 4.0 administration, 4.0 society. Well, we feel the weight of backwardness in all this. And here lies one of the main challenges. One should not be happy with taking stock of this backwardness. Instead, every one of us should do his or her own part to evolve so that our country can develop in a positive way, starting from young people. The youth is not only the future of a country, but also the present of a country. Very often the youth is said to be the future, meaning that they don't count anything today. Instead, I think that the youth should be considered as the present of a country, not the future. And now the floor to Antonella Marsala, who is from ANPAL Servizi. She's an expert in lean production. She is also an expert in business organizational models. We're talking about modern businesses which try to keep up with change or even anticipate change. Well, I fell in love with lean organization almost accidentally. I was actually visiting companies and I was trying to sort of see things in a different way. I've been dealing with active labor policies for 20 years. I wanted to understand how active labor policies could contribute to the organization of a company. And really this has an impact on skills, roles, positions, careers, on demand. And this has given rise to a series of initiatives supported by the European Social Fund and recently also supported by a law which was passed by the government in 2016, which is the law on productivity-linked wage. We hope that after the measures which will lead to a circular letter of the Revenue Agency and also the Ministry of Labour, we will end up having workers' participation in labour organisation. Well, we believe that by participation, what is meant is a series of variables also mentioned by our Chinese friends, which have to do with teamwork, with suggestions from the workers, greater accountability of the workers and the business in relation to the management of time and place of work, not just smart working, but more responsible management in a win-win logic, and a series of other organizational measures which come out from the literature, from case studies of businesses found in the literature. At one point, one should ask himself, which are the actual skills required by industry or enterprise 4.0? Digitalization certainly decreases manual work and some positions in a company. But digitalization has an impact in the planning or design phase. We're not talking about mass production anymore, but a different approach to services and products. And this has an impact on the supply chain of many companies, especially the largest companies, the global organizations, and also those that are smaller in size, but have internationalized, so they had to avoid diseconomies. Otherwise, they would not have been able to remain on the market. This was our starting point. In other words, what was all this work useful for, and what's the relationship with active policies? Active policies are very important in terms of guidance, in terms of transition from one job to the other, and requalification in contexts which are bound to change radically as new technologies become more established. Professor Bertolini mentioned it very clearly. We need to develop skills of a special type. A 4.0 based business must have a 4.0 organization. We have cleaning robots at home. Housewives may have this useful tool available, but if the floor is not even, the robot will not do its job properly, so the house will not be clean but dirty. What does a 4.0 organization mean? It means a lean organization of an evolved type, where workers' participation is the determining factor for an organization to function properly, not only in the phase when innovation is introduced in the company, which is a phase of excitement, especially if there are also tax incentives for this when buying technologies or integrated software systems. It's in the phase of consolidation that this plays an even more important role. You define a process from the design phase to the management of the supply chain, and there the problem is not so much having a software or a special machine, but redesigning processes within the enterprise so that from the worker to the technician to the manager to the salespeople, everyone is fully aware of what happens in that process and of the degree to which your contribution may be important in terms of increasing productivity and efficiency. Actually, the cognitive content increases and the manual one decreases. Cognitive content means problem solving, data searching. It means that you don't have to have more technical knowledge, but you have to give more suggestions and advice. When people ask me what are the digital skills required online, sometimes I answer the finger, your finger. The finger is a basic digital competence. Why? If it is true that most processes will be managed through apps, one will need technicians, engineers, and they will have to develop an app solving the problem. But for the remaining part, workers will use their fingers to make the app work. And most technicians will use their eyes, ears, and mouth, because if, as Enel is doing, I give my technicians goggles for augmented reality, then I have to watch, respond, understand, listen, and speak. So be careful about the size of digitalization. It may well be that there is a need for new technicians, new engineers, new software experts, new big data experts. In the US, 974 new skills were identified for Enterprise 4.0. So very many of them will be required, but they will have to be deployed in a context which is linked to work processes, where large companies know what to do. Sometimes they open up the road and also meet the needs of suppliers and sub-suppliers, bringing innovation forward. Medium-sized companies that have become internationalized are adapting. There are small companies, however, where they don't have a lean organization. The system is rigid, is really Fordist. They have lack of order. There's a great deal of confusion. You don't know what's happening there. And they continue using the low road to innovation, which means reducing costs, working on brutal flexibility on people, avoiding investing on skills. They may invest on machines only, but the impact on efficiency and productivity will be lower because they don't do anything at organizational level. We have attempted to do the following. We said perhaps we need 500, 600, 700 consultants that are expert in new technologies. We don't have to assess how much consultancy costs. If it's good consultancy, it really has no cost. You may pay anything for it. And there are many companies that require these skills. Well, this would be an exceptional active policy. We have had 2 master's degree courses with people who are experts in lean production, taxes, incentives, and all the rest. But what we also need is a realistic approach to governing complexity, working by sector, by industry, with the companies to try and understand what's really happening within the companies. The third aspect we're working at is industrial relations based on participation. Well, this is implied in all this, and it's also very necessary. Enterprise 4.0 needs trade unions that are ready to take the challenge. They have to consider the new organization of the business and the new working times. One must be aware of the fact of the need to generate value in the businesses. At that point, you can bargain, and part goes to the capital, part to the employer, and part to the workers. And this is a new dimension that should not be underestimated. What about the relationship with the universities? Companies are system organizations. The various entities have to talk to each other. We have developed the Labor Atlas within ANPAL, our organization. Well, people usually tell me, well, it's the old system with a ranking, etc. It's not, absolutely not. There is an annex form of the decree passed in June 2015, which leaves it up to people to describe how labor is changing. Well, you may have Ginsberg's traditional description, the T-shaped, and then you have our description, which is core, hollow, with technical competencies, management competencies, and above all, relational competencies. Within each setting, we may have, super skilled, non-versatile technicians saying, as I leave, everything will break down. You normally have a problem of putting a young person next to this technician to learn the competencies. And within companies, we also have the so-called innovators. You don't really know what skills they have, but putting together certain information, working with others, they can attain results which they would not normally attain. Well, these are the challenges for the coming years. We will try and experiment new ways of creating relations because complexity has to be somehow controlled, managed, and governed. There are no standards applying to this complexity. This will also ensure job security. Companies that are highly innovative and technological need to invest on human capital and provide job security. They cannot afford having continuous turnover. I've not seen entrepreneurs implementing big staff turnovers if they have this vision in their mind. Smart working and self-employed workers will also draw benefit from this situation. Thank you very much.
Allora, grazie Antonella Marsala. Io mi limito a...
Thank you, Antonella Marsala. I just want to pick up a few interesting points. On the one hand, the need to hire consultants that can facilitate this process, a process over which we have a poor visibility, and the risk is to remain trapped without having guidance, and we can miss out on this progress and evolution. And on the other hand, I would like to stress the importance of industrial relations. They are still important. They remain important even in a so-called liquid phase, which is the one we are in today. They carry out a unifying function. They provide an opportunity to reconcile interests, which, albeit going in opposite directions, can find areas of convergence. I would like to hand over to Amanda Kornecka now. Good evening, good afternoon, everybody. After listening to these presentations, I've changed many times my own presentation. I have a degree in economics, and unfortunately, I'm not graduated in engineering. And I had the possibility to carry out a postgraduate work trainee program in an important Bologna company. And I was on a team charged with improving production processes and lean production. And I had the opportunity to meet many engineers who manage the manufacturing process of this large company. I'm not going to mention the name of this company because it's not relevant. And I currently work for a personnel selection, human resources selection company. I can contribute to this roundtable in various ways, but I would like to find a common thread, the common thread running through my diversified but short experience. We discussed how new graduates should approach the new labor market within the framework of Industry 4.0. But I would like to reverse this paradigm. The business world should adapt to the skills created by the university. So universities should take up this challenge to develop new skills. Those who have promoted and created Industry 4.0 are the same people who 5 or 10 years ago have been in training in high schools or most likely in a university setting. So I'm worried to see that there is still a very strong misalignment between the skills that you can report on a resume and curriculum and the skills that businesses are looking for when hiring young people. Having said this, based on my personal experience, I can still say that having a degree is still useful. Is it useful in terms of what you learn when living in a university setting? Because of what you learn in university, what is important? The notions that you learn in the books or the soft skills that you acquire by... So let's leave out the engineering degrees. There are other important degree courses that can bring an important contribution to Industry 4.0. I'm not referring to economics, I'm referring to law, humanities, psychology, chemistry, or agrarian sciences, because this is the direction that the true Industry 4.0 should engage in. A new model should be adopted. We are here to discuss all this as if someone had imposed a model from the outside, a model that we have to implement. Maybe we should act more proactively vis-à-vis Industry 4.0. This is not just a model to take on. We should think on how to adapt this new framework to our needs. I've tried to find data and information on Industry 4.0. And this is a topic which is discussed within very small circles, and I see very little coverage in media. Within businesses or in small encounters such as this, there is some discussion of this topic, but there is little knowledge in mainstream society. It's difficult to admit that we have to provide skills to those who do not decide to engage in further education. And on the other hand, we have to convey the necessary skills to university graduates. Those who don't continue their studies with universities are believed to have just manual skills, but this is a wrong idea. There are other channels through which you can acquire skills. And on the other hand, there is a compulsory university pattern, something which is needed in order to get specific credentials and in order to be eligible for a graduate job on the labor market. In some cases, you just have a piece of paper which is worthless. In the sector in which I work, having a degree is necessary, but this could be a degree in economics or psychology or whatever other subject. I search candidates for sales positions. So very diverse skills are necessary. Everything depends on the kind of experience of an individual, both at university and outside of the university. I have a message to transmit to university professors. So you should make sure that students have more freedom of choice in terms of study subjects and in terms of work experiences. It's pointless to work part-time and to lengthen the study completion times. We should make sure that young people are ready for a job as soon as possible. We should revisit the relationship between school and the business world, or university and the business world, in order to provide on-the-field training also during studies, not just after completion of the degree course. And this will satisfy the needs of everybody. Students don't have to make an internship after the degree. And on the other hand, businesses will have difficulty finding a new graduate who have a work experience. I delayed my study course by a few months for this reason, but only 2 years after graduation, I managed to find a permanent job. And being able to speak at this meeting together with my professor places me on a very important level. The degree title is important not just because of the grade, but because of the experiences, ancillary experiences that I made. I didn't get top grades, but I took longer to complete my studies because I engaged in work and other type of experiences. And I've been invited here to present my individual experience. And I apologize for having been somewhat emotional about it.